Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Radnor Township School District Curriculum Committee meeting for November 17th, 2020. And the first item on our agenda, introductions and administrative remarks. Mr. Bechtel?
Thank you, Mrs. Solomon. Today marks 7 weeks since RTSD began phase 2 of hybrid instruction. And I would like to express our sincere appreciation to our teachers, support staff, and administrators for everything they're doing to ensure that instruction in the classroom is rigorous and engaging for both students who are at home and those who are in school. Many districts around Radnor have been running their schedules with an asynchronous day since the start of the school year. And as we have progressed this year, it's become apparent that our students need time to connect with their teachers for support, both for extension and intervention of skills and content. Our teachers also need time for professional development, time to develop rigorous content that engages students in a hybrid format, and time to provide high quality feedback on assessments. As administrators, we've had numerous discussions about how best to address this need for our students and our teachers. We've investigated various models that include 2-hour delays, half days, and full days. And after considering several options, we will plan to have asynchronous days for students K-12 on December 11th, January 15th, and January 29th. We are trialing this for those 3 dates in the months of December and January, and we'll assess how this goes in early February to see if and how this would continue. Our goal with these is to maintain seamless learning experiences and continuous course progression, as well as student-teacher rapport that fosters academic growth, achievement, and student well-being. So that's one of the things I wanted to do, is to highlight something that we're looking to implement for and trial for December and January, and also say thanks to all of our teachers, support staff, and administrators for all of their hard work in meeting our students' needs to start the school year.
And I think on behalf of the board, well, I can speak for myself only, but we're also extremely appreciative to the hard work of the administration and just all the hours put in this summer. And we're also completely, I'm in awe of what the teachers have been able to do and how brave they are to, just keep trying new things and to come in. And so really, our highest appreciation and just really accolades to not just teachers, but all the staff, support staff, everyone involved in keeping this going in a really hard time. All right, that brings us to public comment. Is there any public comment at this time?
There's none at this time.
All right, thank you. Then let's move on. We're on agenda item 3.1, which is the approval of the minutes from October 20th and again on October 27th, when we had to continue our meeting to get through our agenda. Is there anything that anyone wants to amend with regard to the minutes? I'm seeing thumbs up and head shakes, so those are both good. All right, moving along. Let's move into the agenda items. 4.1 are the board action items for the business meeting next week. Do you want to run through those, Mr. Bechtel?
Certainly. Yes, and I will. I'll jump around a little bit here. So we have a number of agenda items, our board action items. First, we've got acceptance of gifts, grants, and donations. We'd like to provide a sincere thank you from the district and ask the board to move forward for acceptance. A baby grand piano from Ms. Heather Riley. We also are pleased to announce that we will be asking the board to accept a technology grant on behalf of REF. And this is the largest grant that REF has ever given to the district. So we're really excited about that. We also have a number of student clubs, both new clubs and renewals at the high school and the middle school. And those are listed on your agenda. And then lastly, we have a request for a student survey, and we actually have the student here with us tonight. So I'd like to ask Sarah Tashow to turn on her screen and join us, and she can talk a little about who she is and what this survey is for. So Sarah, I will turn the microphone over to you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Sarah Tashow. I'm a sophomore at Radnor. So my survey, it's regarding the Rosenthal effect in education. So in other words, it's how teachers' expectations of students influence how much they grow and learn in the subject. And the survey is anonymous. The purpose is to collect research for this topic because I'd like to write a Radnorite article on it. So I'd like to have the survey be able to give it out to students in grades 10 through 12 to allow for thorough data that I can use. It's formatted with a total of 12 questions, but it's really just the same 4 repeated for English, math, and science regarding their experiences in the 2019-2020 school year. So the questions are based on your experience in the selected course, what best describes the teacher's expectations of you, and then on a scale of 1 to 4, how challenged did you feel and how much did you learn? So I formatted this in a way that it'd be pretty quick to complete. So that way it could be given out preferably in homeroom through Schoology. So a wide variety of students could take it and it wouldn't take that much of their time. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Sarah. So provided that the committee approves this and moves it to the full board, we would have Mrs. Kevgis and the administrators work with Sarah to put this out on Schoology. It would be an optional survey for students at the high school, and anyone that chooses to participate would participate, and then Sarah would use the results to write her article, and she would also share the results with the high school administration.
So Sarah, is this just an idea that you had, or are you working in conjunction towards some kind of project on this, or what made you interested in this?
Well, I actually heard of an original study. I believe it was performed maybe like 50 or 60 years ago by a Harvard professor about how teachers' expectations, I believe, would impact their students and how well they performed. And it was taking a look at 2 different, I believe all of these students took one specific test, and a number of teachers were told that this test was, I believe, like some type of intelligence test, and the teachers were given a group of students who they were told to either be the advanced group or the group that scored best and were most likely to succeed in that course, or the group that performed lower. And the students were randomized by class. And the survey, or I guess the researcher, found that the students who were told to have performed better to the teachers, if that makes sense, ended up performing or ended up learning more, even if they performed average or below average on the actual test. And the students who were told, or the teachers who believed that they had the grade level group of students had lower expectations for them and didn't teach them as much information, or they didn't grow as much in that subject. So taking, I guess this survey really, or that research kind of sparked this idea for me, because I feel like I've noticed different types of ways of teaching within the different courses, and just how I feel that impacts how much I've learned. I also was interested too, because I took soundings in 8th grade, and that was kind of formatted in a way that anyone could really succeed no matter what course level you had taken for English or history the year before. And I found that I had increased significantly. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to see, really just looking at how the teachers choose to kind of approach their students, how that impacts their success.
Okay. So I'm pleased to hear that it's just going to be optional, because I don't want students to feel like they have to, take time to answer something that I'm not sure any particular student is going to get benefit from directly. So, but okay, thank you for sharing that. I do want to hear what you find.
Thank
when all is
you.
said and done. Dr. Babson, did you want to chime in?
Sure, I'd be remiss if I didn't chime in. I think it's great that you're doing this kind of inquiry, and I think it's a really great topic. I just a couple of, if you don't mind, put on my my prof hat for a quick second. I would just recommend that you can put, there's the 1968 book, I believe it's a book, Pygmalion in the Classroom. So you could make a citation there. You could also talk a little bit about how you generated your survey. So did you take it from, or did you riff off of it from an existing study? That could be just an easy way to boost your validity, your credibility. You can answer that question right now if you have a sec. I don't want to take up too much time here, but how did you develop your survey questions?
Well, I kind of just, it was kind of based off how the original study was completed. I kind of thought of different questions that I would have asked if I was in that place and just limited it down to those 3.
Okay, great. Well, I look forward to, I think, as Lydia said, as long as you pose it as voluntary, and I can't wait to see the write-up.
Thank you.
Congrats for taking this initiative.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sarah, thank you for joining our meeting and putting up with our questions, and good luck with it all.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Mr. Bechtold, I think there's probably more on your agenda for.
I think that I went through all of the action items. So we did hit gifts, grants, and donations, the student
Okay.
survey, and the clubs. So I think I did see Mrs. Goldman had her hand up.
That's okay. I just had a question for Sarah, but I see that she's gone now. I was just curious about, if there's any defined expectation, what expectations are in general based on previous studies, or is it just something that is so intuitive to students? Like you either feel an expectation, a certain level of expectation, or you don't?
Well, I don't know, Amy. I'm sorry. I didn't see your hand up because I'm jumping between screens here.
That's
So,
okay. No worries. I just, if she, I'm just interested, and maybe if she comes back to share the results with us, we can learn more
Yeah.
about it then.
yeah, I think more to come, it looks like, with that. All right. Are we ready to move to 4.2? This is the 2020-2021 assessment calendar.
Yes, we have Dr. Kearney here with us tonight. And so Dr. Kearney has worked to put together the assessment calendars and worked closely with the principals at elementary, middle, and high school. And so I will turn the presentation over to Dr. Kearney.
All right. Hello, everybody. So this is a brief informational item that was left over from last month, which was also a follow-up from the presentation about remote assessment from September. So as you have in your handouts there, the elementary, Radnor Middle School, Radnor High School assessment calendars have been updated for this year. They're largely the same as what you've seen in previous years. A few of the differences would be that at the elementary level, instead of the F&P, we're administering the Literally assessment, which we shared with you previously. So by now, the first round of Literally assessments have been administered to K through 5 students, and based on the feedback from teachers, they seem to have gone well overall. The MAP assessment is scheduled to begin pretty soon in early December, at least the window opens in early December, and schools are planning to administer the MAP assessment to elementary and middle school students, both in school and remotely. And since the October meeting, we did get an update from PDE about Keystone exams. PDE is extending the winter Keystone administration window from December 2nd until March 31st to allow more time for schools to administer that test. They ideally would like to have some relief on needing to administer Keystone and PSSAs, but they would need permission and a waiver from the Federal Department of Education in order to do that, and that has not come.
All right. Is that all that you want to highlight for us, Mr. Kearney, Dr. Kearney?
unless there was something that people had questions about.
Okay. Committee members, anybody have anything specific? I am just curious. It looks a little uncertain what might actually happen with school closures, and I don't know where we're headed. How will that affect our calendar? Like I'm looking at, we've got for elementary, our NW maps coming up, right, in December. So what will we do if we're closed, if that comes to pass?
The MAP assessment is one of the assessments that we can administer remotely. So
Okay.
we obviously have to talk about it if we come to that point, but it's one that we would probably administer remotely. And currently the plan is for cyber students to take that assessment remotely.
Okay.
Other assessments that we can't give remotely, we may forego. But I think we'd cross that bridge when we get to it.
Okay. And so like what would, well, first of all, did we give PSAT in October to everybody?
No, we only gave the PSAT to the juniors this year, Lydia. Mrs. Solomon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we got that completed. Are we thinking of giving it in the spring to everybody, or have we just, it's too much this year, or what was our thinking there?
We could certainly talk about it. I think our biggest concern for the spring was if the pandemic continues in the fashion it's in right now, is to make sure that we provide opportunities for our juniors to take the SATs at school, you know, possibly 1, maybe 2 dates.
Okay. So, I mean, it was really forced by the pandemic to make that decision. Is that how we got there?
Correct.
Yeah. And what will our midterms look like if for some reason we have closures between now and then?
That's something that we're going to have to discuss when we come to that point. We have several scenarios that we've been discussing, and you know, we want to give it another few weeks before we make that call. Right now, they're scheduled for the end of January.
Right.
We're actually working, and Mrs. Kevgis has been working with her team at the high school to look at midterms and final exams in light of COVID, and looking what other high schools are doing. Dr. Kearney and I, she's been apprising us as they've been going along. So we're going to actually have Mrs. Kevgis come at the December meeting and talk a little bit about midterms and final exams.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'm jumping the gun here.
But presumably there's some plan for students who are online, or all virtual anyway. So hopefully that would, or was the initial plan to have a virtual only students come in separately and take it in person?
There are a handful of exams that cause issues for virtual students, and those are not any of, I would say, the locally administered exams like a final exam or a midterm. It's typically the state standardized exams or the national standardized exams. So Keystones and PSSAs are problematic. So we cannot administer those from a student's house. So that's one of the things that all school districts are grappling with currently. And so, but no, we do not believe that any locally based exams are going to be concerns for us.
Thank you.
So were we able to get everybody, all the juniors and even the virtual ones for the PSSA in October? Or the PSAT?
Oh, excuse me, let me turn that down. Yes, we did for both the PSAT and the SAT. We welcomed the virtual students in that wanted to take part. And we also welcomed in the cohort B students. It was a cohort A day when we actually administered it. And we just arranged for transportation at the end of the administration for those students whose cohort day was not that day.
And I know this is not under our auspices particularly, but are our students able to take the ACT also?
We have never offered the ACT on the weekends or, you know, as an exam or an assessment at Radnor High School.
Right, but are other places allowing them to come or not?
From what I understand, speaking to our guidance department, there's limited opportunities for, you know, SATs and ACTs. But to be quite honest, Mrs. Solomon, the majority of schools this year, and I really do believe moving forward, are going to be test optional.
So this has kind of just accelerated that trend that was starting anyway.
Yes.
Okay. So nobody, I guess what I'm getting at is nobody is going to be locked out of making choices that they are applying to places that they want to because of these testing hurdles. Like,
We will provide all the opportunities that we can. Yep.
okay.
And our guidance counselors have been working really hard with families and students to make sure that, you know, they can help them identify locations for the ACTs since we don't offer them. They've been doing a great job with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Anybody else have anything?
Wait, look, I put my, I found the raise hand button. Does that work better?
I don't see
You know what?
anything.
I'm constantly, I'm shifting between screens because I'm trying to be high tech and not have paper. So I don't, anyway, go ahead, Amy.
I mean, the next thing I could try is like an audible, you know, like hello or something like that. Just let me know what works. Could you just remind me, when did they move the window for Keystones to? It's the December window was extended or something?
It was extended until March 31st, December
Okay.
2nd to March 31st.
So if perhaps a new Secretary of Education at some point wanted to give a waiver on federal testing requirements, is it possible if you hold off long enough that you might be able to not have to administer them at all?
I don't know. I think we'll have to wait and see how the federal government and the state government play together before we cross that bridge.
Okay,
Not-
but technically, like, you don't have to give them, you've got 4 months there. If you were to say not do it in December in the hopes that maybe in January or February, there might be a waiver out there, is that at all? And I know it sounds silly, but I'm just wondering if it's sort of an educational strategy for anybody who's thinking that maybe a waiver of federal testing requirements is something that you might want to see come through.
It's definitely a thought that has occurred to some of us, but I don't know that we know the specifics to be able to say for sure that it's a how much of a possibility it is.
Yeah, no one knows for sure. I was just wondering if hypothetically it's something that's been talked about in administrator circles or anything, and it seems to be like it has. So, and the results of the September window, the October window for Keystones, when do those results tend to come back? Does everything come back in July, or is that just, does that wave of results come back sooner?
I think it comes sooner than that. Dan or PT, do you know when you typically get those back?
A couple months after the exam. So if you have students that typically test in May, then we get them back in, we get the student score reports back in the summer. In the December window, we'll get them back typically in like March or so. So it'll be a couple months from this fall's administration before we get them back. We have not received the score reports yet.
Yeah, it might just be a wonky year altogether because there's been such topsy-turvy in the learning environment, you know, whether you're virtual for some time, you're in person for another time. It'll be interesting to see as these wave of standardized test results come back, what they look like, maybe even as compared to 2018, the 2 years ago when, because they weren't administered last year, what it looks like when you have a more consistent structure to school than it does when there's been less consistency. So I guess you guys are probably going to look at that. And I asked that question only knowing that the data and achievement report is part of what we're going over tonight. So just wondering if that's something on your minds as well. Not that that would be unique to Radnor, but I imagine that educators are going to be looking to see what those results look like in a year like the one we've had relative to a more traditional year.
Yeah, and it is of interest to us. It's one of the standardized assessments that you can get a comparison across years and even look at the same cohort.
Okay, thanks. Those are just my 2 questions.
Okay, anybody else before I switch my screen, which I'm doing too quickly, I guess. All right. I think we're ready for 4.3, which is the 2021-2022 Instructional Calendar. Mr. Bechtel? You're muted.
All right, sorry.
There you go.
Let me just get my screen up here and pull up the draft calendar. All right, so the Draft calendar for instructional calendar for next school year is it's hard to believe we're already planning for the 2021-2022 school year at this time, but you'll notice some minor changes here. We do have some symbols that are here for ADA compliance for colorblind people. So there is a legend at the bottom that helps to identify in addition to the color coding. One of the things that you'll notice at the end of this is we have revised the built-in snow days from 4 days to 1 day with the proliferation of online instruction and hybrid instruction. We believe that there's opportunities there for us to ensure that we have learning going on even when we've got inclement weather. So we were able to reduce those from 4 to 1. We also have realigned the K-5 assessment days. So they're closer to the end of the quarters. And Mr. Dukevich will speak a little bit about the elementary assessment days and I say trimesters for the elementary.
Thank you, Dan, and good evening, everybody. So several years ago when Radnor moved to trimesters, and this is common, I think, when districts move from quarters to trimesters, one of the things that many people forget to do is to recalibrate the student days rather than distributing them in quarters to more thirds of the year. And so something I've heard from teachers, I've heard from principals, and we wanted to correct in next year's calendar was distributing student days in thirds rather than what they were previously distributed in. Just to give you an example, this year, our first trimester is 42 student days, our second trimester is 65, and our third is 69 student days. So very unequal distribution of student days. Next year, they will be equally distributed in 59 to 60 in each trimester, which is it's more suitable, more practical for student instruction and identifying indicators of progress and assigning kind of summative and formative evaluative results for students when they're better distributed, especially when our progress report is correlated with standards. So it's mastery of standards and progress towards standards. So I'm very happy to say that we've now calibrated those days and also assigned our assessment days where the trimester ends, where in the past it's been weeks before the end of the trimester. So it didn't make a lot of practical sense. So I'm happy with what we came up with, and I think it's going to better serve our teachers and our students.
All right. Does anyone, committee members, you have any questions or comments? Everybody's good with that. I noticed that we're starting after Labor Day, just putting that out there. I also have a question about this year. So if we hit a snow day this year, is everybody just going to go virtual? Or are we kind of not at that point yet?
I'll let Mr. Batchelor jump in here.
Have we been talking about that?
And, with everything going on this year, I will tell you that if we are still in hybrid, I will be more likely to make calls the night before for inclement weather because it would just be too much really on the system with all the different bus runs we're doing in hybrid right now to be making calls in the morning. So knowing that we can be online, knowing that that is something we can do, even this year, I would anticipate that when we have inclement weather, I would probably be looking to make the call sooner so people can plan the night before, and that we would direct everyone to move to virtual instruction for that day, for just that one day. We left one snow day in the calendar for next year. We have several built in this year, and with the support of the school board, I would still like to possibly call a snow day this year or next year or future years as well. I think that, hopefully we will, I should say hope. Yeah, I'll say hopefully we get one nice, I always want one nice big snowstorm that everyone can go and enjoy. And with that built-in day, we can still call a snow day and not have everybody go virtual and let the kids, let our staff, have an actual snow day. And then future ones after that one that we have an actual snow day, whether it be the first one or not, I don't know. But we could have virtual days after that because it starts to make sense. Once you get past one, we're tacking on to the end of the school year. So that would be the goal moving forward for both this year and next year. So snow days wouldn't completely go away. We could still have one and our kids could still enjoy one. But then beyond that, we would be able to do virtual days.
So, Mr. Batchelor, I love the idea of snow days for fun, but I would also point out that, remember, a lot of kids, if they're home and they lose power, they won't have Wi-Fi, so it will be difficult for them to participate in asynchronous school. So so I'm not saying you should never call a snow day beyond one, but maybe keep in mind if it's going to be particularly icy or a particularly large part of the district seems like it might be without power, that could create an added level of stress and strain.
So it's for that reason that you'll see that the calendar does have up to, I think, 5 or 6, I forget. We still have days in there so that if we have power outage days, and when does the power go out here in Radnor? That never happened.
Only at the middle school.
Oh yeah, well, that's right. That was yesterday. Oh yeah. But yes, that we do have we do have not only the built-in day, but we have where we tack on the days at the end for that very reason. There could be days where once we use our one snow day, and then we have power outages across the community, that we're going to have to just take a snow day as well on those days due to power outage and tack it on to the end of the school year.
I also just wanted to thank, I don't know who put together the calendar, but I know there was a lot of discussion last year about moving to starting before Labor Day. And as a member of the facilities committee, I really appreciate that you didn't do that for this upcoming year, because this is already a shorter summer, and trying to move the start date up would have limited some of our construction abilities for the infrastructure project. So thank you for thinking of that.
Maybe I'm missing something, but do we have the number of student days on the calendar? I thought we used to do that, or
no, we have not. We track that administratively, but we have not had them on the calendar.
Okay. So do you know off the top of your head what a number of student days we have?
Let me go through. We actually do track this. So we track both student days and teacher days. And so there are 192 teacher days. One of them is a built-in day, so we would cut that down to 191. And there's 181 student days for students in grades K through 11. There's 181, but again, there's one built-in day. Seniors always graduate slightly earlier than the rest of their peers. So with the built-in days out, teachers will have 191 and students will have 180, except for the seniors.
All right, thank you.
I have a couple questions, unless you're still going, Lydia.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, Ms. Goldman.
I mean, this is the earliest I've ever seen a calendar come out in quite some time. Am I right about that? Because usually it's February, March when the calendar gets approved. And can you talk a little bit about? Yeah, I mean, maybe not last year because I wasn't on curriculum, but I know that typically, because I used to be one of those calling when I was a parent, the superintendent's office saying, when's the calendar going to be approved by the board? Because we were looking ahead towards the summer and stuff. So is November a relatively new deadline to do calendar?
It is earlier. We've had years where we've been, in January, February, approving the calendar for previous years. We talked last year about wanting to move that up and wanting to do it sooner. So that's why we're talking about it now at the beginning of November or mid-November.
Okay, I think that's great. I mean, I think that'll be good for parents to know we're ahead of the curve like that. And just to help me better understand this, the student emergency makeup days, those would come into effect if the goal plan is that aside from that 100% pure snow day, play in the snow kind of thing day, put that aside. Anything else that's a snow day where your expectation is short of a power outage, kids would learn virtually. When would you need to use student emergency makeup days if all the other times they're out of school, they're going to be learning?
Those are contingency days. And so if we would have a situation that is unforeseen where we would have to make up days, I don't know if there's a multiple district-wide power outage or something 2020 has been crazy. So I don't want to, I want to knock on wood here and not speculate that everything's going to go smoothly. But, those are in there. Those would just be letting parents know that we may tack those on in the event that there is a true emergency, and we run through that one day that's built in, Mrs. Goldman.
Okay, thanks. And generally, it sounds like much of the calendar is the same as it's typically been in terms of structure. So in terms of communicating to parents, any of the high level, like jump at you kind of changes, there aren't as many of them this year as maybe there have been in past years. Is that right?
That is correct. This calendar is very similar in scope to what we presented previously.
Okay, thanks so much.
I think one thing, the spring break is very late next year, so it'll just be a long spring. February and March, we're gonna hit it hard, but it just is what it is.
Was there anything that came out of the calendar committee's work that's been implemented here that doesn't readily jump out at us besides the decisions around whether or not to start before or after Labor Day? Is there anything other takeaway? Because it was a while ago now that the calendar committee was working. I know you were on it, Sarah. Is there anything that's on here as a result of that committee that as a quick reference point you can give?
There's nothing that I can point out, Ms. Goldman, that I'd say like this is a definitive outcome of the calendar committee that was a takeaway.
Okay, thanks.
I'm gonna put Mrs. McMenamin on the spot. I think I probably know the answer, but is there any comment that you would like to make on behalf of the teaching professionals with regard to the calendar?
Not really. I think we knew that going into the way we have it all set up, that we would have the opportunity to go virtual, especially like for snow days and things like that. So no, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Any other calendar? I'm actually surprised because usually the calendar generates a whole bunch of comments and questions. So with that, I guess we can move on then. That brings us to 4.4, and that was Radnor High School PE requirements.
All right. Yes. Thank you. So, so we had a committee that met last year and looked through. It's called the PE for Athletes Committee, and it went through and looked at what the high school requirements were for athletes and non-athletes at Radnor High School. And so I'm going to screen share briefly and just run through some of the highlights of this PowerPoint. So this was something that we put out in June, and it talked a little bit about the purpose and the goals of the committee. One of the things that we did is we looked at, how do we have the credits, and we talked a little about, what other schools around us offer, and looked at those type of things as far as like what are other school districts offering as far as their credit requirements and their classes. And then the committee went and pulled together feedback from students, and we had a survey, and the students gave us specific feedback about what they'd like to see. And then we looked at our takeaways. So our takeaways from this committee that met last year was, ensuring the wealth of the health and well-being of our students is really critical for us, that our kids are involved, that the credit requirements have changed for PE, and that we require more health and PE requirements than other districts around us, and that we need to revamp our course offerings. So the next steps that we presented this summer was to look at revising the course offerings, a reduction of the PE credits required for graduations, and opportunities for drop-in fitness activities during the day. So this fall, we met with PE representatives from the PE department. Mrs. Roseland is our health and PE department chair, and she's with us tonight, and Mrs. Kevgis. And so we met with high school PE teachers and talked about the feedback that was given to us by the committee and also by our students. And Mrs. Kevgis and Mrs. Roseland are here tonight to talk a little bit about the work that we've done this fall. So Mrs. Kevgis, Mrs. Roseland, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Mr. Bechtel, is it possible for you to bring the summary sheet up that we have shared with the committee?
Certainly.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for having us tonight. We do truly appreciate your time. We do have some information to share with you. I'm going to let Mrs. Rosen start. Mrs. Rosen is the department chair for our health and PE department, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Rosen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me this evening. I'm really grateful to be here, and I thank you for the opportunity to look at the high school program and kind of revamp it and make it meet our students' needs. So first, as you can see, our old requirements, we required 1 credit of health and 2 credits of phys ed. And now our current offerings, well, actually pre-COVID, current before all that went down, we did 9th grade health and wellness was required. 10th grade health was required. And then at the end of freshman year, our students would take a swim test, and then we would place them in either beginning swimming or intermediate swimming. And then they also got a chance, if they were advanced, to go into a different wellness elective. You can see the different electives that we have. We have 11th and 12th team sports, individual and dual sports. We have a selective weight training course, a personal training and physical fitness course, lifeguarding and CPR, which is one of my personal favorites. We have a swimming selective course, a fitness for athletes, and of course we run an adaptive phys ed program. Mrs. Kepkis was going to talk about the proposed new offerings.
Sure. So for this year and this year only, given the health and safety concerns that we had with COVID, one of the goals that we had over the summer was to make sure that our core classes were as small as possible, and particularly with PE and health, that became a real concern in terms of class size, to make sure that we kept them as small as possible. With that in mind, we looked at the class sizes, looked at the sections that we had, and for this year, and again this year alone in COVID, we went with 1.5 credits total, where we had ninth grade taking both our health course that we've had in place for years, and also PE. And then in 10th grade, students were only asked to take that health course. Our overall credits were actually lowered for this year to 6 instead of 6.5, only for that reason. Moving forward, looking to the future, and as a result of the committee work that we did, the proposed PE requirements would be the following, right? So 9th grade would stay intact, right? Where students would take both health and wellness as a 9th grade student. As a sophomore, health would also stay intact. So they would get 2 half credits of health over the 4 years that they were here at Radnor. And they would have 0.5 credits or a half credit of PE in their freshman year. At the end of their freshman year, like Mrs. Roseland said, students are asked to take a swimming test to see what their level of proficiency is. If a student tests at beginner, right, then they will be asked, or required, not asked, but required to take beginning swimming moving forward as a sophomore. It will run as a semester course every other day, so it will be a 0.25 credit that could take place in either the fall semester or in the spring semester. But if they place out of that swimming, if they're at the intermediate level or above, then they could take other electives, including physical education electives that are offered in the department. One of the things that Mrs. Roseland and other members of the department discussed with us, and I feel strongly about just as they do, is that swimming is really an important life skill. It's something that, I think many of us take for granted, that we have access to swim lessons and access to pools, here in Radnor, but I don't think that's always the case for our students. And I think we need to be cognizant of that, in terms of equity and looking at that piece. Again, it is such a life skill that we want to make sure all of our students have. So moving forward, again, 9th and 10th grade, they would have health and PE. 10th grade, every student would have health. If they, tested out of swimming and were above that beginner level, they could take another elective in PE or other content areas. If not, then they would be required to take that semester of swimming. So that's why you see that variation of 1.5 to 1.75 credits. Mr. Bechtold, if you can go down past the current offerings to the proposed offerings. So I don't mean to be redundant, but again, we have those, the 9th grade health and PE that's always paired together, 10th grade health and beginning swimming. You'll notice that, all of the courses, whether they are the ones that we have in place now or the proposed offerings for the 2021-2022 school year and beyond that, the following school year, 2022-2023, there is an R or an E next to it. So anything that has an R is a required course, whereas anything with an E next to it is an elective course. Mrs. Roseland touched on the fact that lifeguarding and CPR, is a really popular elective, but it's also such a valuable course that we have in our program of studies, and that's something that we really want to maintain moving forward. Team sports is another, elective that's very popular at the high school. PE individual and dual sports. Mrs. Roseland, would you mind explaining what that is? I'm not sure I ever do a very good job of that.
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to. So right now, our individual dual sports is all pretty much lifetime sports is a way you can think about it. It's a lot of racket sports. We do tennis, we do pickleball, we do badminton, and we do just different fun recreational things like bowling. We do bowling in the back gym, which the kids really like. We do a walking unit talking about getting into target heart rate zone. We do a golf unit because that is another lifetime sport. So that's pretty much what the individual dual looks like. There's also rollerblading in there as well. Is that good, Mrs. Kevges?
Yeah,
or do you want a little more? Sometimes we do a little mindfulness in there. It just depends on the teacher. Some teachers might do a little yoga. It really depends on what teacher you have.
Thank you. Thank you. And finally, we do have that PE weight training course in place right now. So there's a caret next to those two, both the individual and the weight training course, because those, are now open as electives to 10th through 12th grade students. Those electives will be replaced with new electives in the 2022-23 school year, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So if you move down just a little bit and look at the course offerings for that following year, again, 9th and 10th grades stay the same with the requirements that we've already discussed. Lifeguarding and CPR remains in place, and team sports would remain in place. I'm going to ask that Mrs. Roseland, talk a little bit about the 2 or 3 proposed new electives that we're looking at. We did feel strongly that, PE individual is something that we want to hold on to in some capacity. So, we're likely looking at rebranding that and perhaps, calling it something like Wellness for Life or something along those lines. But Mrs. Roseland, I'll turn it over to you for a minute.
Okay, great. So with the proposal, these 2 to 3 new PE electives, it's super exciting because we can go in so many different directions. And, we're really grateful to Mr. Bechtold and to Mrs. Kevges for kind of allowing us to explore all these different options. So since our meetings, we have, as a department, we've been looking into getting at least one of us getting certified for yoga. 1 or 2 of us are really interested in Pilates. We're also interested in athletic training. So I've reached out to Temple University to kind of talk about that and how we can have an elective, with our students, and then maybe they could kind of go out into the field and put that in use with our athletic trainers, or being on the sideline of the different sports that we have and that we offer at Radnor. So we were looking at those different types of things. And then with the new renovation, which we are so excited about, and that new weight room, which is just going to be awesome. We are looking at a strength and conditioning class for some of our athletes to kind of take during the day. And this way, if our athletes will take that during the day, then that would kind of free up a little bit of their time after school, where they wouldn't, they could just have practice and they wouldn't have to go into the weight room to then get their lift in. Then they could go home and use their time, wisely with academics or whatever they do in the evening. Our kids are amazing and they all do so many different things. So they would have that time. And then of course, the other part of that strength and conditioning, we would also look at, and of course we'd come up with a really fun name, but like a muscular strength and endurance type course where we could get, just really use that weight room and just show the kids, the the different things and the different pieces of equipment and the things that you can do in there to kind of de-stress and just kind of make yourself feel better about yourself and all the good things that we know exercise has to offer.
So I'll just touch, thank you, Mrs. Roseland. I'll just touch on that last piece where it's discussing the wellness and accessibility project timeline. I think that we were very intentional in terms of, not just looking at the spaces that we would need in order to run these PE courses and the timeline of when construction would take place, so that we weren't interfering with, the department's ability to be able to hold their classes. And I think that we did a really good job of taking a look at those different phases and making sure that, again, they were able to, run the curriculum that they want to be able to do. But also looking forward to this incredible, structure that we are going to put in place and all the possibilities that it holds. I think that Mrs. Roseland and her team have done such a great job of starting to reimagine what PE can look like and what wellness really should be in terms of, us moving forward, or our students moving forward, as adults, and making sure that wellness and taking care of themselves is really an integral part of their beliefs and a part of their life. So thank you, Mrs. Roseland.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Okay, Ms. Goldman, you want to start off?
Yeah, just a few questions. One is, I know that at the June 2nd curriculum committee meeting, we didn't have time for this PE presentation. Did we end up going through it on July 28th, the meeting where we passed the resolution for the gym requirements specific to this school year? I can't remember. So we never really, you went through it pretty quickly, Mr. Bechtold, but I just wasn't sure if we actually had a chance to go through the review of the findings from your PE committee.
I believe you are correct. I think that this was on 2 different curriculum committee agendas and then a business agenda. And I think that one meeting went until like 1 in the morning. I am certainly open to answering any questions. I think this is the 4th time we've had it posted to board docs, but if there's specific things about this PowerPoint, I'd be happy to go through them.
Okay, well, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything, because it's been, I think for some of us, a much anticipated presentation, because there was a lot of interest around PE and a lot of work on the part of administrators and committee members and obviously staff who went into putting that together. So I just wanted to make sure, because I do have a couple questions about it. One thing on the chart that you just reviewed, Ms. Kevkis, about current PE requirements for Radnor High School, it's set, and by current, it says 1.5 credits. But I just wanted to double check, because on the PowerPoint, and maybe I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding something. It says 2 credits on slide number 4. RHS PE requirements on that slide from the PowerPoint, graduation requirements, it says 2 credits in physical education.
Is that possible to bring that up, Mr. Bechtold? That might have been a typo on my part.
Because then it also says, 1 credit in health. So I just wanted to see it. It didn't quite jive with what you have on this one sheet. So I just wanted to see what was going on with that.
It should be 1.5. I can tell you that that's the correct number.
All right, let me see. Mrs. Goldman, do you know what slide it is from the
4.
PowerPoint?
Yes. Yep, slide 4.
All right, so slide 4, we've got 3 total credits. We've got a 9th grade PE, a 9th grade health, a 10th grade PE, a 10th grade health, and then 11th and 12th grade PE for a total of 3 credits. That is
above. It says 2 credits in physical education in the paragraph. It's different from what's on this sheet. So I was confused and circled it.
It's just a different way of presenting it. So if we look at, so that's 3 total credits was the old requirements when the committee did their work. And currently, if we, let me pull up this other one, it is,
So when you say old, you're talking about which school year and what does current mean?
last year. So last year it was 3 credits. So we had 3 credits required for students last year. We had 1 credit of health. Half of it came in 9th grade and half of it came in 10th grade. And then we had a half a credit every year for 4 years of PE. So that was equal to 2 credits. So it was a total of 3 credits for anybody that was going to Radnor High School last year. When the board took action this year, currently we have 1.5 credits. We still have the same 1 credit of health. We have half of that in 9th grade and half of that in 10th grade, and we only have a half credit of 9th grade PE. So it's 1.5 currently for this year.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I just, that threw me off which year it was because it was referred to as old, current, and proposed. And I was just thrown off not knowing which year, which year, specific school years you're referring to. And proposed would mean anything from 21, 22 on. Is that right?
Correct. So we understand that we've got the program of studies coming up, and we wanted to, get ahead and give this committee an opportunity to see the work that's been done. Mrs. Kevgis, Mrs. Roseland, Mr. Ryan, and Mr. DeCipio met with me a couple times this fall to go through and look at the feedback from the committee. Actually, Mrs. Roseland was on the committee, as was Mr. Ryan, and so we went through and worked through what the feedback from the students and the committee was to start to put together some of these changes. So we wanted to get ahead of the program of studies presentation.
Okay. And one thing that I've always been curious about is this: how do the state standards, which are listed on slide 7, play into the curriculum for physical education? Because I see the state standards for grades, physical activity for grade, or for physical activity for grade 9 and 12. And do all those things fit into the way you run your physical education program for the high school, those standards?
So, and if you're I believe you're referring to slide, let me look at number 7.
Yes.
So yes, so one of the things that we do is when we go through and create our curriculum documents, the curriculum documents are created under the umbrella of the state standards, the SAS portal. So our teachers, when they do curriculum work, they go and they look at that as a framework to help to identify eligible content as they create those curriculum documents, which are listed on our website under the curriculum page.
Okay, just 3 more quick things. One is, I know you are a big champion of swimming. I agree, it's a life skill. I'm also sensitive to the fact that there are some students, it's one thing when you're 6 and you don't know how to swim, you don't feel like, I'm going to make a weird pun here, a fish out of water. But when you're a teenager and you don't know how to swim, that can be something that's really embarrassing, and at a time when you're struggling with other things that make you feel out of sync as an adolescent. How do you handle that when a student has to take a swimming test in front of peers and it's found out that they can't swim?
Mrs. Goldman, you want me to take this? So Mrs. Goldman, that's such a great question. And that was one of the reasons why we pushed swimming into that 10th grade year, because we realized it was a little awkward, uncomfortable. Hey, you're welcome to the high school, bang, put on a bathing suit and get into our pool, right? So that's why we put it at the end of their freshman year when they're a little, the swim test at the end of their freshman year, to push swimming into sophomore year when they're a little bit more comfortable being in the high school and being in their own skin and all that stuff. To specifically answer your question, if a student does not know how to swim at all, they do not need to take the test. They just automatically go into beginner. So they never have to even get into the pool. They just sit on deck that day, and we make it known. If you don't want to take the test for whatever reason, you don't have to. And if you would like to take the test at a different time, if you don't want to take it in front of your peers, you can take it during community period, or you can take it at the end of the school day. Just schedule a time with your teacher. So we absolutely 100% accommodate our students' needs, and they do not need to take it in front of their peers if they do not want to. Most of the kids, it's funny, they'll just come and sit on deck anyway and say, I forgot my stuff. And that's normally how they handle it. And then I say, okay, no problem. Just schedule time with me to take it, at a later date. And so it's really not a big deal. I know that it sounds like it is, and it sounds like it's kind of scary and intimidating for them, but it's really not. And our whole program is challenged by choice. We never want to make kids feel uncomfortable. That's not, obviously not why we get up in the morning. So we do give them, probably more options than we should, but they have a ton of different options to take the test. They do not have to do it in front of their peers.
Yeah, I would think sometimes even changing in front of peers, that's just not something you think of, especially if you're just transferring to our school and you don't come from a school where they're swimming. Is that something that's proactively communicated to students so that they don't, that they know that it's a little safer than it might appear? I mean, had I not asked the question, there might be people who are wondering, how do you handle that? Because it could be awkward for an adolescent.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we do our best to tell our students, ninth grade year is a big year of self-advocation. We tell them they need to self-advocate. That's one of our big themes. And so we're hoping by the time that we get to that swim test, they have that ability to tell us, either Schoology message or come see us personally. Mrs. Roseland, I really don't feel comfortable taking this test in front of the class. Is there another time I can do it? Or Mrs. Roseland, I can't swim at all. Can you just put me in beginner? And so they know that they have those different ways that they can communicate with us or kind of work around that test.
Okay, and so I just have two more questions. Thank you for efficiently answering them, and I hope I'm efficiently asking them. But this has been a long-awaited study. It's been since June, and it's been of a lot of interest, at least to me and perhaps others, about what the outcome would be. And so I also am thinking about this in terms of the wellness study, the district-wide wellness study. I know that physical education is a component of that study. How do the findings from this committee fit into the overall architecture of the wellness study, and specific to the part that's about review of physical education?
So I'll jump in there. So one of the things that the district is continuing to do is to refine our wellness study. We are looking to present that this spring. And so, we certainly have this opportunity with this high school infrastructure project to prioritize the well-being of our students. And so this is something I know that Dr. Kent, who is the health and PE supervisor, has worked closely with Dr. Kearney and Mr. Regal. And so we have had input regarding student wellness as it pertains to health and PE for the wellness study. And that is something that we anticipate will be presented sometime later this spring, Mrs. Goldman.
Okay, great, thanks. And my last question is about the courses coming up. And I was looking over some of the suggestions that the committee had come up with for interesting electives and what some of the other school districts, frankly, are doing that sound really neat and a bit of a departure from what we've been offering, what we might be offering going forward. And I was wondering if you'd thought about leveraging some of the resources around us, Penn Sports Medicine. I know that some other school districts, from what you have in the PowerPoint, are offering medical law, ethics for health professionals, sports medicine, officiating, things like that, to really give as comprehensive an exposure to what physical activity and sports is all about. So I thought, has there been any conversation with Penn Medicine, or even, the DCIU has exercise therapy and sports science programs. Is there any natural synergy with working with the IU to maybe even show that is an offering? Should someone not want to take an elective through Radnor, that because the tech school offerings are considered electives and some of them dovetail within this, has there been any thought of good cross-pollination that way?
I'll jump in there for a second. I spent time on the phone last week and the week before with the director of Penn Medicine at Radnor, who is very interested in partnering with us. And so we are looking to, for opportunities, not just for our students to do internships or to have internships with the, building across the street and other Penn programs, but to also look at, ideas like you're speaking about. So yes, those conversations have begun.
And DCIU anything, or that doesn't seem to be?
I
mean,
personally,
yeah, DCIU. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I have not been in touch with the DCIU at this point. No, only Penn.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate having a chance to ask those questions.
Mrs. McMiniman, are you putting your hand up or are you stretching?
No, I am actually. I just had a question too. When I went to Radnor, I was a student athlete, so I was a fan of gym club. I mean, a fan of PE and gym and all that. Right now in the US, we have obesity, depression, a lot of stuff that's the highest it's ever been. We are offering some really cool electives, but we also have kids who are never going to pick those electives. And by pulling out the requirements for the upper grades, I'm concerned with those kids who are not fans of PE and exercise and aren't going to choose these electives. So what happens to these kids in those later couple of years, even in 10th grade? We had to take swimming way back in the day, as a requirement also. So I'm a little concerned with what happens to those kids, mid 10th grade when swimming is over and there's no forced requirement for exercise.
I'll jump in. I think one of the things we've realized, and one of the things I've seen over the years, both as a high school principal and as a parent, that those very kids you're talking about, Andrea, they weren't getting turned on by fitness through a lot of the physical education programs we're offering. What I'm excited about is what our phys ed teachers are looking to do with looking at some of these other opportunities through these other programming, whether it's yoga and other things. This new fitness center, the opportunity the fitness center will provide for opportunities for kids to have drop-in times to, use it and use it on their own. The one things our kids want at the high school level is more of that freedom and that choice to be able to do things on their own and to engage in physical activity. So I think the challenge for us will be that freshman year. What kind of excitement and what do we do freshman year to lay the groundwork for them? What is available for kids to stay physically active and to take advantage of the programs we have in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, and take advantage of whether it's drop-in or after school. We have a lot of kids that do that physical activity, unfortunately, outside of the school. They're joining clubs and joining other places, locally, because we haven't had the facility. So we'll have the facility right here. We also know that 70 to 80% of our kids are involved in between athletics and I believe marching band. It accounts for almost 70 to 80% of our student population. So we already have a highly engaged. So those students that aren't engaged, that's the piece where I think freshman year is going to be really critical for us to engage them in lifelong fitness and to provide them and show them opportunities to continue with that lifelong fitness in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade.
So, Mrs. McMiniman, you stole the words right out of my mouth, because I was thinking along the exact same lines, that I think there's students. All right, so I'm going to kind of categorize students, which I shouldn't do, but I'm going to do it anyway for the point of an example. So you have kids that are natural athletes, and so this is great for them because now they don't have to spend their school day. So say you're a swimmer, you don't have to spend 9 hours in the pool during season. Okay. So take a kid who's really academically motivated, and so they're taking a full course load, and there aren't enough electives in the day for them to take everything they want to take, because they want to do band and they want to do maybe an extra science course or maybe an extra language, or 2 social studies, they can't decide what they want to do. So having the PE elective, you force that kind of student to have a break in their day. where they have to do physical activity, they have to do something completely different than maybe what they love to do, which is, you know, kind of a more academic student. So I'm concerned about that type. Well, there's two groups I'm a little concerned about by making this change. The student that is more of an academic student that would push themselves and would fill up on electives and might really want to take a gym elective, but they won't do it. They'll opt for that second science course. They're not going to have physical activity in their day, and they may not be on a sports team. So I'm worried about them. And then I'm worried about the students that aren't in that 70% that play a sport or have already joined something. I don't see them maybe picking these as electives either. So are we maybe, I could see how this is great for the student athlete and the scholar athlete, but I'm not sure I see this as great for some other pockets of our population at the high school.
And I think that's one of the big issues. I think that's the inequity you would create if you did this only for the athletes. If you allowed only the athletes and said, athletes, you now don't have to take anything during the day, then they have an advantage that other kids that, you know, don't have, just because they're not playing, they're not running cross country, or they're not doing something. You know, it's the focus needs to be on lifelong health and wellness and lifelong fitness. And the opportunity we have in ninth grade to really revamp and look at how we run a very different program and get focused. You know, we heard Amy talk about yoga and other activities that are lifelong exercises that are important for our kids. I think that will engage also our students that aren't interested in, you know, playing a competitive team sport in a phys ed class, or not necessarily interested in running a mile. You know, that's the last thing they want to do, but we want to get them physically engaged. There's other avenues to engage those students that I think between freshman year, the electives, and then the opportunities for the drop-ins, I think could be very exciting, could change and shift what health and wellness looks like at the high school level, you know, for our students.
Just one more thought or comment about it. So thinking back to a million years ago when I was in high school, the PE courses were kind of the great equalizer. You know, it was really that and kind of lunch where everybody was thrown together. It was kind of really random who was in your gym class. It was a totally different experience because you tended to be in, unfortunately, you know, you tended to be in classes with a lot of the similar students, and you maybe didn't ever meet a lot of other people in your high school. So we're going to lose that. Like, I think so do you know what I'm trying to get at? That was an opportunity for kids to just be thrown together in a class pretty randomly. Is there any way that's going to be captured in what we're doing, or is honestly the students in the high school becoming even more, I'm going to call it segregated into kind of what they like to do naturally anyway?
You know, I think you have a valid point there, Mrs. Solomon, but I do think there's opportunities for them to, you know, be with other cohorts, whether it's grade level or just, you know, by friend group or however you want to categorize the kids, you know, in our electives, because they are, you know, not just for freshmen or not just for sophomores, right? There's always a mix of kids in those classes. There's a mix of kids in, you know, world language as well. So there are different opportunities where that presents itself. The PE was certainly, you know, is certainly one of those places.
Ms. Dunn, Dr. Babson, any comments on the PE? Go ahead, Ms. Dunn.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. So I actually think the swim test and knowing how to swim, it's not just a life skill, it's a safety issue, right? I think our students need to know how to swim when they graduate. I think we owe them that since we have the facilities to ensure that. I know this year's 10th grade, they weren't around to take the swim test in the spring, and they don't have a requirement this year. And I know, so I guess my question is, for this year's 10th grade, will there be swim tests? I mean, are we going to just say, that class, there may be some non-swimmers? And I know it may not be a lot of them, but I have concerns about whether we're skipping them. And then I know that so that's my first swimming type question. I have 3 of these. The second one is, we are going to offer beginning swimming, presumably for this year's freshman class next year. But we're going to have a pool closure at some point for the construction. So how are you solving for that? And the third swimming related question is, I see currently there's a swimming selective elective, and I don't know if that's not that popular, so it's one that we're dropping, but I haven't seen it on the proposed offerings going forward. So I have concerns about how our swimming program may be shifting, and wanted to ask what the plans are for those pieces.
I'll take that. So I might forget, there were 3 pieces, right? So swim selective was first, right? Or was last, but I'll take that first.
Yep.
That's a course that, was not something that was getting a lot of traffic, to say the least.
Okay.
So that's something that will be eliminated from the program of studies this year. In terms of the, actual facility and the infrastructure project and upgrading the natatorium, that is scheduled, if I'm not mistaken, for March, right? And so we would look to run the swim classes in the fall, ideally. And then in terms of, the current sophomores, that's definitely something that we have to take a look at. It is on the list to think about because they are missing that opportunity. And, right now our sole focus was really to get the kids in the school. And now we start looking at all.
And I don't mean it at all to sound judgy.
No, I didn't mean it that way. But, there is certainly a list of things that we have to get to. And that's one of them for sure.
Okay. And I apologize. I should know the pool closure schedule for that infrastructure project, but I don't have it
by heart.
Okay. So those were my swimming related questions. You mentioned that there would be drop-in options but I thought I heard that it was for athletes to come in and do weight training or fitness training during the day. And I just wanted to make sure that it's not just for student athletes, that other students might have an opportunity to do drop-ins. Is that right, Ms. Rosalie? I see you nodding your head.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
No, that's
it
okay.
is. It's for everybody.
Okay.
We, hopefully we can instill that love of exercising and working out and that they do it in their free periods.
Great. So that actually brings me, I think it is really important to instill this love of gym. And I am going to confess, I played 7 semesters. Well, I played sports every trimester of my high school years, except the one year I decided, I'll just take gym. And I never took gym again because it was so miserable to take gym in high school 3 days a week that I would rather have had to do 2 hours of sports every day after school. And so I sympathize with those kids who did not like gym class. And it's not because they're not necessarily athletes or athletic. It just, not all gym classes are for all students. And I will confess, it was a pickleball class that sent me over the edge. So I think that I really appreciate that there's an attempt to try and I saw revamp a lot in the words from the students, the surveys, and I appreciate that that the PE department is looking to do that. I guess my question is, do we have to wait another year for that? Is there any way any of that could be done for 2021-22? And I was trying to figure out why, and I heard you say a couple of teachers are looking to get certified, and I certainly recognize that this year certifications might be harder than usual to get and to fit in. But I just wonder, especially like yoga, things that we know the kids are looking for. We know they're even doing sometimes as training for their athletics and mindfulness. I think those are great things that it'd be great to see if we could even get 1 or 2 electives in for 21-22 as opposed to waiting to 22-23. Is that a pipe dream?
So I'll jump in and take this one. So we discussed and we're still working through what the training requirements would be. So Mrs. Roseland's reached out to Temple. We've also looked at Lower Merion, O&J Roberts, Downingtown are offering either a sports medicine or sports trainer course. And we're trying to figure out how, what the requirements would be to do that. The previous district that I worked in had a very popular, and the high school that I went to had a very popular sports medicine and student athletic training course, and that requires a lot of work. We're also looking at the composite phase plan, Ms. Dunn, as far as what areas that the PE teachers would need to use would be out of commission. And so I think there's a number of things. We want to make sure that whatever we do, that we roll it out really well, and we give ourselves the time to make sure that the teachers feel comfortable getting the training that they need. And so, yes, we are looking ahead, but we would love to expedite it, but I think that we're very comfortable, and the department's very comfortable with the timeline that we put together.
Okay, last one. And I'll tell you, I also kind of struggle with whether there is still some value in requiring another elective or two. Maybe it's not the full 3 credits, but maybe it's 2, right? Maybe it's getting some other options in there. And maybe it's because there are some quarter credit classes, electives. But one of the concerns I had here was, I count currently 8 elective PE offerings. And what's written down says that there'll be 2 or 3 new electives plus the lifeguarding and the PE team sports, which is 4 or 5. I think when I heard Ms. Roseland talk, the bounty of options she had sounded more like we'd stay with 8 or so. But I'm concerned that it looks like we're dropping our elective offerings from 8 to 4 or 5 because we don't really expect students to engage. And I want to make sure if we say we want students to do this, that we really give them those options. Is it a matter of how many will be offered at any given time, or are we really thinking of cutting the number of course offerings?
So we looked at feedback from student surveys, and we looked at what we are offering this year, and we looked at what we offered last year, and then we looked at what the student surveys offerings were. And in looking at, students were really interested. If you look through the graphs, they were interested in some sort of yoga and Pilates. So we said that was a priority. They're interested in sports medicine and athletic training, and that was a priority. And then knowing that with the high school infrastructure project, we're going to have a real opportunity with the weight room to revamp it, some sort of strength and conditioning course. We also looked at what some of the more popular offerings were. Some of the courses, just because they're listed, doesn't mean that they're running. And so team sports was something that when we met as a department this fall and talked about what were the ones that we felt that were really important. Lifeguarding and CPR came up from the health and PE department as key, and team sports came up as key. So I think that planning to move forward, we certainly could come back after we implement this and say we'd like to add something else. But I think that there is certainly enthusiasm among the department looking into yoga and Pilates, looking into an athletic training course, and we could certainly add if we see the need for that, or that there's student interest in adding additional things.
Okay. So I don't feel like so we aren't really dropping from 8 to 5 is what you're telling me? In the program of studies, you will see that, but swim selective, I don't even know if that ran last year. So there's certain courses like personal training and physical fitness. I do not believe that ran last year. So just because it's offered in the program of studies doesn't mean when you have students that sign up for it in course selection that you get enough students to fill those courses. So it's one of the reasons that we surveyed students to find out interest level, but we also have student interest level through what they've been selecting the last couple of years through their course selection process in the spring. Okay. Last comment, I wanted to say, I appreciated you explaining, Ms. Roseland, what the individual and dual sports was, because I didn't really understand that, and I didn't have a chance to go look at my book, the course guide. I think that lifelong, that's probably in a lot of ways more valuable than the team sports, right? Because it's harder to get together 2 soccer teams to play on a weekend when you're an adult than it is to find someone to play tennis with you. No, but I'm talking genuinely about lifelong learning and lifelong wellness, if this is what we're focused on. So I think whatever you can do to market that program and that class as something that students, will really be a lifelong skill for them, I think would be great. Maybe minus the pickleball.
Yeah, absolutely. We would, definitely. We have lots of directions we can go with that individual dual class. And of course, we'll change the name and try to make it sound really appealing to the students. So, and give a nice description so they can see all the different things. But pickleball will be included. So, because it is a great
That's
lifetime sport.
Maybe we can start an honors pickleball course. Just
Maybe.
for Miss Dunn.
No, so thank you very much. I guess the question I have for the committee is, are we pushing back at all about the number of credits, or are we pushing this forward to let the board consider that more broadly?
Well, I think to me, it's kind of a conundrum because I do see the point that we've had an issue for several years about the student athletes feeling like this PE requirement was a burden. And I actually sympathize with the point that, so we need to make it a level playing field for everyone. So then we can't favor people that, choose to play a sport. So I don't know. I mean, I can see both sides of that one. Dr. Babson, Ms. Goldman, Ms. McMenamin, anyone have any thoughts on that one?
I just have a quick question to throw in there. In taking the requirements out and making the electives, looking out for teachers. Sorry about that. Yeah. Sorry. And looking out for our teachers, and I don't know, Amy, or you got or PT, how this affects, staffing. If we have these as electives and kids don't sign up for these courses because they're not required, how would that affect staffing for you guys and eventually lead to a trickle down effect if these courses don't get filled? Because now there are more elective options than requirements.
Couldn't figure out how to unmute my thing for a second there. There's a balance there for sure. We actually have 2 teachers in the PE department that have multiple certifications, and so they can swing back and forth between business. We have Mr. Horner, who also teaches business courses when we need him to. That came in handy this year when we had to eliminate some of the core electives that were offered, and we were able to offer more business because of his certification. And we have Mr. Kyle Shilcock Elliott, who teaches math and PE. So we always manage to make it work in terms of the section numbers and the demand that the students have moving forward. We've already looked at what the different scenarios would be and to ensure that we have proper staffing for it.
So does anyone have any other thoughts on Ms. Dunn's question? Are we going to put this, committee members, are we putting this through to the rest of the board as a recommendation, or up for discussion for their opinions on it?
Well, something that was just mentioned that I'm not sure I heard the resolution to was one of the impetuses for the convening of the committee, I think, was the concern about athletes feeling like they are playing sports every year, engaged in physical activity, and having the opportunity to get a credit for that to satisfy a PE requirement would allow them to, because essentially they are exercising. I think it was also for band. It would then free them up to take another course that they wanted to take. And maybe I missed it, but how does this proposal for going forward address that?
Because everybody gets an extra credit that they can choose to do with as they will. We're minimizing the requirement across the board for everyone. So the athletes are included in that.
Okay. Ms. Kapkis, you look like you had something to say.
Could you repeat your question, Mrs. Goldman? So
initially, and forgive me if I'm just, it didn't come into my head as well as I had wanted it to, but we heard a lot from athletes, or some that was put out there, a conversation about how when you are an athlete, they felt that also being required to take physical education when the physical education was a sport of some sort, was sort of doubling up. And they would have rather been able to satisfy the requirement of participating in a sport by their chosen sport, and then use that and have that time to take something else. So it wouldn't feel like doubling up. And I was just asking, how this new proposal addresses that. And I hear what you're saying is that essentially you took away that requirement for everybody, not just the athletes, right?
Correct.
Okay. Just by extension, some of the courses that you're talking about taking, I'm also now thinking of the 339 requirement, career readiness. And some of the courses that you're talking about, I know you have to come up with a portfolio in 11th grade to satisfy 339. Is anything about this, I'm just trying to think of multiple uses of some of this new curriculum. Is any of that able to be used as artifacts towards what portfolio you have to put together in 11th grade? That could be an incentive to address somebody else's concern about what if a student doesn't find something that they want to take. I think you were saying that, Lydia, and they don't participate, that it could actually help satisfy what's required in terms of 339. If you're studying physical therapy or sports medicine or sports training, thinking about ways to appeal to students outside of just this container of PE might be helpful in that regard. I was just sort of thinking off the top of my head that way.
Yeah, I think it would certainly, as we move forward and we refine the choices and really fine tune the electives that we're looking to offer in the future, I think that's certainly a lens that we should look through. And again, it's about marketing. So maybe that's part of the marketing piece, for students moving forward in terms of exactly what you're talking about with 339.
Yeah, if that promotes additional engagement, that speaks to maybe one of the other concerns somebody brought up is what if there is some sort of drop off in participation? Well, let's find another way to entice them to participate. And that sort of was the first idea that popped into my head.
If it's all right with everyone, I want to save some time or a lot of time for item 4.5, which is the 2019-2020 annual data report. So let's move on to that. I don't know who's going to kick that off. Mr. Bechtold?
All right. So I'll thank Ms. Kevius and Mrs. Rosa for coming. Just point of clarification, Ms. Solomon, we'll come back and present this as part of the program of studies because there will be modifications to the program of studies for health and PE. And I guess if members have questions, we can answer that at that time. We will have Ms. Roseland and the other members of the department move forward with continuing to explore Pilates and sports medicine and things like that in the interim.
I think that's where we are because it will come back up again when we talk about the program of studies. So that will be an opportunity for this committee and the board, to look at it again. I do think there seems to be some discomfort with it, but let's move forward.
Well, I want to just make sure we're clear. So we do need the board, my understanding is, and we need the board to vote on, changing the PE requirement. So that's what we would look for a board vote. We could do that next week. We could do that through the program of studies. Mr. Bechtold, what was your thinking on when would be best to have the board take that action?
So again, my thought process was if this, was a curriculum committee was in favor of it, we would have brought changes to the high school program of studies, and we would have also asked for, we've gone to the policy committee next and have the AR for the graduation requirements policy changed. So we could, I guess that's a clarification we can have with Mr. Kristofka. Will we want a board action on this, Mr. Batchelor, or we want to go through and bring it to policy?
All right, so we don't need to take action next week. We can actually do it next month, either through a change in policy, or we could do it next month through a change in, the challenge is a change in the program of studies. We can go and adjust the policy after the board makes a decision. That we don't have to change the policy first. The board can make a decision separately to adjust the phys ed requirement. And then we could then go back and adjust the policy to reflect what that board decision is. The challenge for us is timing. You know, we need to get this program of studies, and the program of studies is done in December. This is the administrator's recommendation, you know, moving forward. I want to thank, you know, Amy Rosalind and the entire department, our phys ed department and the staff in that department, through what has been very difficult discussions and topics, has really jumped in at every moment to really talk about and focus on what can we do, you know, for our students and putting our students first. Some of our kids, you know, our kids take classes for personalities sometimes, and we have some incredibly gifted teachers in our phys ed department who kids value, and kids get a lot out of that connection, you know, in their lives. And so I think that the plans moving forward for what they want to do for freshman year, and then for those opportunities that we can then create to instill that lifelong fitness in our facility in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, I think is exciting. And this is going to continue to evolve and grow as we move forward. So I just wanted to thank Amy and the entire department for all their efforts with it. It's really very much appreciated. You guys have been just wonderful with your coming to the table and willing to roll up your sleeves and work, you know, together collaboratively on this. So we'll administration will come back with whether we'll do this for program of studies or we'll put this on for an agenda item. But it sounds like we have time to, with the program of studies, wasn't going to be till December, right? Dan, is that accurate?
That is correct.
Okay.
It's not my place, Lydia. It's really yours. But I would suggest that this has had enough. It's been prevalent enough of an issue in the community before COVID, at least.
Yep.
And the board was so well aware of it, and we did have the committee that worked on it. My personal preference would be that it comes before the board separately and not just as part of the program of studies. But you know, that's not my call.
Yeah, I think so. Depending, we can discuss this if it's going to be on the business agenda or how we want to bring it before the board. But I actually agree with that too. So, so this, in a sense, is tabled, if you will, to come back up.
Well, not necessarily tabled. What I'm hearing from Sarah, I would say we could bring it up next week. I do think there is. Yeah. We have to be careful. What I do notice is whenever we talk about something, and we've had a good discussion tonight, and if we put things off a month or two, we wind up rehashing it all over again. And so, you know, so it may be best to have this, you know, bring forward next week as our normal plan. We bring it to a committee, and then it's on the following agenda. So
let's do that. Let's bring it up while it's fresh. It's already been punted since June. Yes, let's just have the full board weigh in. This has been kicked around for a number of years now. You know, let's move forward on it, and you know, just have everybody in agreement that that's what we're going to do.
And like everything we do, we need to be willing to adjust and learn. There might be things in here or decisions we're making that we might discover there's something else that we hadn't thought about, or another piece that could improve this in one direction or another. And that'll be thanks to the work of our teachers and the administration continuing to collaborate and work together, and our students. Our students give us great feedback.
Okay.
Could I just ask, since this wasn't a presentation that ever actually took place, that when it is prepared for the business meeting, that the full board gets to have the benefit of seeing the materials that we had the benefit of seeing as a committee?
Yeah, I take your point. I think it has been circulated a number of times as a curriculum committee item, but yes, it was never presented. So maybe a short. Well, frankly, we've had snippets of it all along, and we're implementing parts of it this year. But yes, it would be a good idea if we're going to talk about it. Okay, let's if we move on to the data discussion. So this is item 4.5, the annual data report.
All right. For our last agenda item, we have our annual report on district data and student achievement. We are sharing this for the board and community as an information item. Due to COVID-19 in the spring, our students did not take the Keystone exams or PSSAs, which we talked about a little bit when we had the Dr. Kearney presenting the assessment calendar. Both the Keystone exams and the PSSAs show student growth and achievement gaps. So that data is missing from the data report this year because we did not administer Keystone exams or PSSAs due to COVID in the spring. However, our teachers and administrators look at other ways to identify student growth and areas of need throughout the school year, including coursework and curriculum common assessments. RTSD is also working to implement an MTSS model this year. MTSS stands for Multi-Tier System of Support, which uses student data to provide academic support structures for students who are struggling. This is a very fluid movement for students in and out of these support structures. We plan to have a presentation about our MTSS implementation from Mr. Dukevich and Mr. Regal later in the spring, and they'll talk a little bit about the data that's being used to provide these MTSS supports for our students. But we did want to put this on the agenda because this is something historically that has come out in November, and just make sure that the board and the community knew that this was put together.
And this packet was something that we created just 3.5, 4 years ago, and it's very extensive. There's a lot of data in here. Each year it grows. What's different this year is normally our principals will set up goals that often the goals are based upon looking at maybe an achievement gap issue, looking at a growth issue, and using PSSA data, using PVAS as a metric. And those goals that they have developed, it made it a challenge this year to bring all our principals, to have them come forward right now and share, extensively that particular goal aspect as it applied to the data when that data doesn't exist. We didn't have the students test this year. We have a lot of other internal resources and testing that we're doing as well. And there's a lot of other things we're doing to gauge that achievement. And also as an administration, as we look at developing, we'll be talking in December, our district goals, for this school year. One of the things that we have been looking at and we want to continue to look at, not only under the diversity and equity and inclusion, but also when we're looking at our achievement gaps and how are our students across the board achieving. So we'll have more conversation of that as we look at our goals for next year as well. So this is much more of an abridged version of our data report with everything else going on, that's been going on this school year. But the data that's in this packet, I think it's 50 pages the last I looked. It's something that we monitor very closely administratively. So even among all the other things that are happening with us and trying to just remain open in hybrid right now, I want to thank the administrative team for putting this together and updating it, because this is critical for us to be looking at. And as we're putting it together to evaluate for ourselves, we figured let's share it with our community. Let's make sure our community and school board is aware of this information as well. We're looking every year to expand this and look at what other pieces of data, what other things do we want to include in this report. But this is kind of an unusual year, living in the I'll just say it's 2020, but it's an unusual year as we look at this.
So, this is really one of my favorite documents. So it's a huge disappointment that we don't have. This is a huge part of the goal setting for the principals, is that we look at and actually get data on all the different groups of students. And so what are we going to do to sort of fill that gap? And I think a lot of people are wondering, how are our students faring under hybrid, virtual, whatever they're doing? So when are we going to get literally results? When can we look at the math help me out.
NWEA, the math.
Thank you. Math results. What are we going to do to fill in what we don't have?
Yeah, I'll let Sean and Dan, go ahead, guys, jump in. But
that sounds good. So, so we did have Mr. Dukevich and Dr. Kearney that came and spoke about literally and one of the reasons that we went through and presented the assessment calendar today was because there are a number of assessments that we give to students that our teachers and our administrators look at to draw conclusions about who needs to additional support, or who is really growing and needs extension. And I think that's a piece of the MTSS that I talked about at the opening. So one of the things that we want to do is make sure that with our MTSS model, which you'll hear about later this spring, that Mr. Dukevich and Mr. Regal have been at spearheading, is really making sure that we've got these fluid opportunities for students to move in and out of supports, and we are looking at the data, both curriculum-based assessments, common assessments, and things like that. So we do look at that information. Mr. Dukevich, you want to talk a little bit about literally or any of the information for NWMS for elementary?
Yeah, sure, Dan. So we finished literally, the first window was our baseline assessment, the first time we've ever administered it. And we administered it both in remote format and in person and hybrid. So it's tough to base much off of it yet because it's a baseline, but it was our consistent way of tracking student progress with fluency mainly. So that assessment was complete, and our teachers are preparing to share some of those results with parents during parent-teacher conferences next week. And our MAP window opens, Jim mentioned at the very beginning of the meeting. MAP opens December 2nd and goes through January and even into February a little bit. So then we'll have the results from that MAP assessment. But additional to that, I mean, we have a ton of content and common assessments that are interwoven amongst all of our, core instructional assessments. And so those are pieces that inform teachers formatively along the way. Those aren't things that we would necessarily, put into a cumulative data report. But day-to-day, teachers are using assessments, part of our ELA, our math, and science and social studies to drive their instruction and indicate for them how students are progressing. MAP and literally, we can certainly share out some summary data. I would say probably after the first window, if the committee would like to see that, certainly.
Well, I'm looking for, and this, I know the sort of format has changed, but we used to look at showing a year's worth of growth for every single student. Like, I see what you're saying, where we can catch kids that are falling behind, but that's not answering how the bulk of our students are doing. It's certainly not answering how our advanced students are doing. Like, we used to get data that showed that if which groups, we're showing a year's worth of growth and which ones weren't. And so
this is where we're being freed up. We all of that year's worth of growth, all of that data that was being presented in the previous years was based on the PSSA exam, or it was based on the Keystone exam. All of that growth aspect was PVAS, was all based on a state assessment, and a state assessment that was not given this past year. So we have an opportunity as a district, we are using many other assessments as well to look at, and that's what Jim Kearney shared earlier in this meeting. What are some of those other assessments we're doing? So we can go back and take some time and look at that in the future on how have these assessments, which we're already doing right now, to see how are these assessments impacting, whether it's curriculum-based assessments, whether it's the MAP testing, to find out how our kids are doing on hybrid. So our whole world has changed for us to understand how are our kids achieving right now, because it's trying to understand how they're achieving under our current instructional model. I think the exciting piece that frees us up in the long term beyond COVID is, do we want to be so focused with our data reports on the PSSA? Because that's where they've been the focus. When we bring our principals have been sharing the last few years how our students are achieving, whether it is the advanced group, whether it's the achievement gap. It all has been the bottom, the foundational data element that we have used for that has been the PSSA. And that didn't exist this year. How do we want to do that moving forward? We're anticipating it's going to happen this year. Who knows? It may, and that was the conversation from earlier. Who knows what could happen with state testing this year again? So this is an opportunity for us as a district now to start looking at how do we want to gauge that once we're beyond COVID, but also more critically, how do we want to engage it? And what we're looking at right now, and which we can do in future meetings, is how do we want to gauge what we're doing right now? And that's something that our team has been focused on and looking at and working with our teachers, is how are our kids achieving and achieving under our current structure.
Because that model of a year's worth of growth did really allow us to uncover some really interesting things. I mean, and I think it helped lots of kids that, I will say, groups of kids that maybe were a little bit more advanced, that were doing fine and nobody ever pushed them. And I think then when they said, oh, well, actually, that's not okay, they need to be moving along too. I think that challenged us in a good way.
It did. I think across the Commonwealth, it gave us a data point, and it gave a data point to then dig deeper and to have other discussions. So yes, I think there has been that data has been helpful to us. I've always been a believer. I'm somebody who we had the issue when I arrived that a lot of parents were waiving out of PSSAs, and we turned that around, and we had fewer each year waiving out of the PSSAs, because I have always felt it shouldn't be high stakes. I don't think it should be a high stakes test, but it is a data point, and it's an important data point for us to be using. But it's a data point we need to use in concert with others. So luckily we have the other data points. Now we need to be adjusting this year and to use those other data points to assess how our program is going this year.
Okay, so I guess we still have to put together how we're going to look at that, because I mean, obviously, literally,
that's ongoing. That's the ongoing work that's happening right now. I mean, besides the ongoing work of just trying to stay open every day, the ongoing work of trying to assess, what is our program and how is our program achieving, and how are we evaluating that? And that's something all of our administrators have been working on in the last few weeks, is just looking at how are we assessing. And that's why part of why we shifted to some of those assessments that we're shifting to. Problem is we shift to new assessments because we're living in an online world and different things. We don't necessarily have the same baseline data for some of those shifts that we're making. But that's a focus for us moving forward, is making sure we're evaluating how our program is currently working.
Committee members, does anybody have specific questions on, I mean, I know we used to get much more, it sometimes covered 2 curriculum meetings, because each principal would present their own data and how they were going to address what they saw. So I have one nitpicky comment. Under the colleges, you just need to merge the College of William and Mary with William and Mary, because that's the same school. So that would be on page 22 and page, where is it? And page 17.
Thank you. We can make sure that change is made.
Can I ask one question about the PVOS page? Maybe I should know this, but the initials next to the evidence of growth data, the DB, LB, R, and G, what do those stand for?
Dark blue. I'm sorry, what page are you on, Ms. Goldman?
35.
Okay. 35. So you've got red, green, light blue, and dark blue.
Which
dark
means
blue,
what?
Dark blue, I think that your point's well taken about for the lay person not to have some sort of a legend in here. Dark blue means that there is significant evidence that the students exceeded growth. Light blue is that there is evidence that they have exceeded growth. Green means they met their growth target, and red, there's a yellow in there that means that there's evidence that they did not meet it, and then red is significant evidence that they did not meet it.
Does that compare with the PA Future Ready Index? Because I seem to remember there was a color coding for that, or where do those? Who's color
It's
coded?
all pulling from the same data. So this is all PVAS growth data and the PA Future Ready Index all pulled from Keystone and PSSAs. So it is all the same data points.
Okay. Is that something that could be added, just the what those initials stand for, or is that not going to mean anything because it's a black and white document?
You mean the DBs and the Gs? I
Yeah.
think that we could certainly put that in there. I think that would make sense for a lot of people that are not in the field, that when they look at that, what that means.
And this might seem like a question from a while ago, but is there used to be this HUGS category, historically underperforming groups. Is that something that's still measured today?
There is, if you look in the PA Future Ready Index, they do have subgroups that are broken down. So my understanding is that that they break down groups more specifically than they did in the past. So I believe that they've got economically disadvantaged that you can look at in there. I do believe they break it down by demographics, specifically by race. So I think that that's something that when you look in the PA Future Ready Index, you can find that information there.
Have you ever considered adding it to this? Because I know that's probably a post-analysis that we get when the principals present their findings, but in the absence of a principal presenting a finding, if this is going to be a really comprehensive data report, have you given thought to including that each year if that data is already out there to grab?
We could certainly look into it. If anybody's ever been on the PA Future Ready Index, it is a very robust page and you can drill down. So we could certainly look at it as an administrative team and see what we feel that would be valuable for the board and the community to look at, to include in here. Even on PVAS, this is one page of PVAS, but if you go into PVAS as a website, and you drill down there, I mean, you could get hundreds and hundreds of different reports and pages of reports that drill down into specific things. So this is certainly an overview, and we could look and see if that is something that we could, is there an overview that we could pull from PA Future Ready Index that would be valuable for the community?
Yeah, we can add that. I went back and looked at previous reports, and it was in the principal's presentations, depending if they had a focus on achievement gap issue is where we would see the discussion or the presentation on those pieces. So that element we have looked at in the past. It didn't always make it into the thick booklet as I pulled back previous booklets out, but we could certainly add that.
Yeah, I think that's important. And even perhaps the link, establishing the connection of this data to what the state has before us in terms of the PA Future Ready Index, even if it's just a line, like for more information, you can look at the state data reports in a year, I think would be helpful to put even more of this into context without, and help us evaluate this, aside the principal reports aside going forward without making it a 200-page report.
Well, we used to disaggregate by school too. And so, because there's differences within grade levels at schools. I mean, just looking at this page, I think we did put it in color last year, but I mean, there is more to talk about here. And I know we have to, adjourn this meeting, but if you look at 8th grade, across all 3 subject areas, we've got a big R. And I would like to know more about that, because that's just not a one-off. That seems to have been for the past 4 years in every subject. So I have specific questions, and I would like to see this disaggregated by schools. So more to follow on this. That's a huge, undertaking. And I know, everybody's scrambling just to get through this year. So I think we have to call it a day, because we've got another meeting right after this. But I think—
Thank you for all the information today. We covered a lot of material. It's very important.
We did a lot.
2 hours, and a lot of, I don't see Mrs. Rosalind on either, but for everybody's contributions to what we covered today, thank you, because it's important. It's important.
To have a 2-hour time slot is helpful.
Yeah, and thank you for updating the data dump. I mean, it's really, it is kind of the backbone. So thank you for all of that. And our next meeting is coming right up. I think it's the first week of December. We're meeting on December 1st at 5 p.m. So thank you, everyone.
I think December 1st at 5 is policy, Lydia.
I don't think so, not according to, anyway.
Just a double, before anybody, I'm sure we'll
Your calendars, everyone.
correct it, but just want to double check that.
No, it is. It is. We're
Oh, it is curriculum? Okay.
We're running a bridged month because December's off. So
I did check right before this meeting, so I thought it's changed while I'm sitting here, which could have happened.
Policy's after curriculum. That doesn't usually line up that way, so I got confused, but thank you.
Yeah, there's only a few committee meetings in December. Okay, thank you, everyone.